The stars looked different when you were running for your life. Ambassador Veltar pressed his crystalline hand against the viewport of his escape ship and watched another Zephyrian world burn in the distance. The orange flames spread across, the planet's surface like a disease, consuming everything his people had built over 3,000 years. His ship shuddered as debris from the destroyed orbital stations hit the hull. The Korthak Empire had arrived 6 months ago with their dark metal ships that looked more like giant insects than proper vessels. They didn't negotiate or make demands. They simply started eating everything in their path. Veltar's communication. Officer turned toward him with fear flickering in her compound eyes. Ambassador, we're receiving the final transmission from Kepler-7. The planetary defense grid has fallen. Another world lost. That made 17 planets consumed by the mechanical monsters in just half a year. The Zephyrian Confederation had ruled this sector of space for millennia, their elegant crystal ships maintaining peace through diplomacy and careful trade agreements. They had never faced anything like the Korthak. Set course for the Jupiter. "System!" Veltar commanded. "It's time to swallow our pride." The human diplomatic station orbited Jupiter like a metal moon, bristling with communication arrays and docking ports. Veltar had visited it only once before during the initial contact. Ceremonies 15 years ago. Back then, the humans seemed like curious children, eager to learn about galactic civilization, but clearly too young and aggressive to be taken seriously. Now those same humans represented his people's last hope. Captain Lisa Martinez greeted Veltar in the station's main conference room. She was tall for a human female, with dark hair pulled back in a practical style and alert brown eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Her uniform was crisp and clean, bearing the insignia of the United Nations Space Command. "Ambassador Veltar, welcome to Diplomatic Station Alpha," Martinez said, offering the traditional Zephyrian greeting gesture. "I understand this visit concerns an urgent matter." Veltar's crystalline form flickered with embarrassment. The Zephyrians had always considered themselves superior to the younger races, maintaining polite but distant relations with humanity. Now he was here begging for help from people his government had dismissed as barbarians just months earlier. "Captain Martinez, I come before you in great need," Veltar began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Zephyrian speech sound like singing. "The Korthak Empire has invaded our territory. They are unlike any enemy we have faced before." Lieutenant Jake Peterson, Martinez's communications officer, leaned forward with interest. He was younger than his captain, with sandy brown hair and the kind of intense expression humans got when they were trying to solve a puzzle. "We've heard rumors about activity in your sector, Ambassador. Our long-range sensors have detected unusual energy signatures." Veltar activated his portable holographic projector, filling the space above the conference table with images of destruction, burning worlds, shattered space stations, and the twisted remains of Zephyrian crystal ships floated in the display like a nightmare made real. "The Korthak are not like other races," Veltar explained. "They are biomechanical entities, part machine and part organic matter. Their ships can adapt to any weapon we use against them. When we fire plasma cannons, they develop plasma resistance. When we use quantum torpedoes, they learn to deflect quantum energy." Captain Martinez studied the holographic images with professional interest. She had seen battle footage before, but nothing quite like this. The Korthak ships looked like giant metallic spiders, their hulls covered in what appeared to be living tissue that pulsed with unnatural light. "How many worlds have they taken?" Martinez asked. 17 so far, with more falling each day," Veltar replied, his form dimming with shame. "Our military commanders estimate that at their current rate of advancement, they will consume the entire Confederation within 2 years. Peterson pulled up a star chart on his tablet, marking the locations of the attacked worlds. "They're moving in a straight line toward the galactic core. If they break through your territory, they'll have access to the major trade routes." "Exactly," Veltar said. "Which is why we come to you now. We have heard stories of human military capability. Your reputation for warfare is considerable throughout this sector of space." Martinez and Peterson exchanged glances. The humans had built their space military based on hard-learned lessons from centuries of conflict on Earth, while other races developed elegant energy weapons and graceful fighting techniques. Humans had focused on overwhelming firepower and adaptable tactics. "What exactly are you asking for, Ambassador?" Martinez inquired carefully. Veltar straightened his crystalline frame, trying to maintain some dignity despite his desperate circumstances. "We request military assistance. A small tactical force would be sufficient. Perhaps 5 of your vessels. To supplement our remaining fleet." Peterson nearly choked on his coffee. 5 ships? He had seen the human fleet rosters. 5 ships wouldn't even qualify as a patrol group in human military organization. 5 ships, Martinez repeated slowly, making sure she had heard correctly. "Yes, we understand that humans tend toward excessive responses," Veltar said, waving, a dismissive appendage. "But this situation requires surgical precision, not brute force. Too many ships would create logistical problems and might escalate the conflict beyond our ability to control it." Martinez kept her expression neutral, but Peterson could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. The Zephyrians clearly had no idea what they were asking for. Human military doctrine didn't recognize concepts like surgical precision when facing existential threats. If the Korthak were as dangerous as Veltar described, the response would be anything but subtle. "I'll need to forward your request to Earth Command," Martinez said diplomatically. "The decision for military intervention isn't mine to make." "Of course, we understand your chain of command structure," Veltar replied. "How long might we expect to wait for a response?" "Standard. Protocol calls for a 72-hour evaluation period for requests of this nature," Martinez explained. "Though I should warn you, Ambassador, humans don't typically approach military problems the way other species do." Veltar's form flickered with what humans had learned to recognize as Zephyrian amusement. "Captain Martinez, we have studied your species extensively since first contact. We are well aware of your tendency toward aggressive solutions. Surely your leadership will recognize that this situation calls for measured response rather than overwhelming force." Martinez nodded politely, but Peterson could see she was already composing the priority message to Earth Command in her head. When humans received requests for military aid, especially against threats that could potentially reach human space, the response was never measured. "We'll be in touch within 72 hours, Martinez promised. "In the meantime, I'd like to review all the intelligence data you have on Korthak capabilities and movements." As Veltar prepared to transfer the requested information, he felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. 5 human ships might not seem like much, but if the stories about their combat effectiveness were true, it might be enough to turn the tide of battle. He had no idea that his request was about to trigger the largest military mobilization in human history. The message from Jupiter Station arrived at Earth Command at exactly 1400 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. Admiral Kate Sullivan was reviewing quarterly fleet reports when her aide knocked on the office door with the priority communication tablet in his hands. "Ma'am, urgent diplomatic request from the Zephyrian Confederation," Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner announced as he placed the tablet on her desk. "They're asking for military assistance against something called the Korthak Empire." Sullivan picked up the tablet and began reading Captain Martinez's detailed report. Her expression grew more serious with each paragraph. The attached intelligence data painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Biomechanical ships that adapted to every weapon used against them. 17 worlds consumed in 6 months. A direct path toward the galactic core that would eventually threaten human space. "Get me Admiral Carter, Admiral Chen, and General Rodriguez," Sullivan ordered. "Emergency War Council in 30 minutes. 28 minutes later, the secure conference room beneath the Colorado mountains filled with holographic projections of humanity's top military commanders. Admiral Ben Carter appeared from his headquarters on Mars, his weathered face showing concern as he reviewed the Zephyrian data. Admiral Paul Chen joined from the Outer Colonies Fleet Command Center, while General Sam Rodriguez connected from the Luna Military Academy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation," Sullivan began, activating the main display screen. "The Zephyrians have requested our assistance against an adaptive enemy force that's systematically consuming their territory." Admiral Carter leaned back in his chair, studying the tactical projections. "These Korthak ships are impressive. Biomechanical adaptation means traditional weapons become less effective over time. How many vessels are we talking about deploying?" "That's the interesting part," Sullivan replied with a slight smile. "The Zephyrians specifically requested 5 ships. The room fell silent for a moment before General Rodriguez started laughing. 5 ships? Did they say 5 companies? 5 battle groups? 5 fleets? "Just 5 individual vessels," Sullivan confirmed. Ambassador Veltar was very specific about wanting surgical precision rather than brute force. Admiral Chen shook, his head in disbelief. "These people clearly don't understand how we operate. 5 ships wouldn't even qualify as a scouting mission in our doctrine." Sullivan pulled up the current fleet status reports. "According to the latest numbers, we have 847 vessels combat-ready across all fleets. The experimental ships from the Titan facility are also prepared for field testing. Commander Nicole Hayes materialized via hologram from the Luna shipyards. Her engineering background showed in the way she immediately began calculating logistics requirements. Admiral, if we're looking at full fleet deployment, we'll need supply chain coordination across 12 different star systems. The new quantum drive ships can make the journey in 48 hours, but the older vessels will need 72. "What's the threat assessment on these Korthak?" asked Admiral Carter, pulling up the intelligence data on his own display. "If they can adapt to our weapons, we might need to approach this differently than usual." General Rodriguez studied the enemy ship configurations with professional interest. The adaptation capability is concerning, but it appears to be reactive rather than predictive. They learn from what we use against them, but they can't prepare for weapons they haven't encountered yet. Sullivan nodded. "Which gives us an advantage. Our arsenal includes weapon systems that no other galactic civilization has developed. Kinetic bombardment, gravity manipulation, quantum disruptors, and good old-fashioned nuclear weapons. The Zephyrians mentioned that the Korthak are heading toward the galactic core," Admiral Chen pointed out. "If they consume enough territory, they'll have the resources to push toward human space within a decade." "Exactly my thinking," Sullivan agreed. "This isn't just about helping our neighbors. This is about preventing a future threat to Earth and the colonies." Commander Hayes brought up production schedules on her screen. "If we're mobilizing the entire fleet, I can have the remaining experimental vessels ready within 24 hours. The new antimatter torpedoes haven't been field tested yet, but this might be the perfect opportunity." Admiral Carter smiled grimly. The Zephyrians asked for surgical precision. They're about to learn what human precision actually looks like. Sullivan activated the fleet coordination system, sending alerts to every command center in human space. Within minutes, reports started flowing in from across the solar system and beyond. The Mars Defense Fleet began warming up their drives. The Outer Colonies Fleet started loading supplies. The Experimental Weapons Division on Titan received orders to prepare their most advanced prototypes for combat deployment. Operation Iron Thunder is now active, Sullivan announced. "Full fleet mobilization with combat deployment to Zephyrian space. Timeline is 48 hours for advanced units, 72 hours for complete deployment." General Rodriguez pulled up troop movement schedules. "What about ground forces? If the Korthak are consuming planets, we might need boots on the ground." "The Marine Expeditionary Forces are already being briefed," Sullivan replied. "General, Murphy's people will deploy with the second wave if planetary assault becomes necessary." Admiral Chen studied the star charts showing the distance to Zephyrian territory. The logistics alone are going to be massive. We're talking about moving nearly 1,000 ships across 40 light-years of space, plus supply vessels, medical, ships, and support craft. Commander Hayes nodded enthusiastically. This will be the largest military operation in human history. Bigger than the Mars Independence War, bigger than the Titan Rebellion, bigger than anything we've ever attempted. And the Zephyrians think we're sending 5 ships, Admiral Carter added with amusement. Sullivan stood up, signaling the end of the briefing. Gentlemen and ladies, we have our orders. The Zephyrians asked for help, and by God, they're going. To get it, every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology we can bring to bear. As the holographic projections faded and the commanders returned to their posts, Sullivan remained in the conference room, studying the tactical displays. The Korthak Empire had made a critical mistake. They had threatened humanity's neighbors, and humans took neighborhood security very seriously. Across human space, the largest fleet ever assembled began preparing for war. Shipyards worked around the clock loading weapons and supplies. Crews received emergency recalls from leave. Experimental weapons that had never seen combat were loaded onto ships designed to test the limits of human engineering. The Zephyrians had asked for 5 ships to provide surgical precision. They were about to receive 847 vessels delivering overwhelming force with terrifying efficiency. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had a reputation for excessive responses to military threats. Operation Iron Thunder would reshape the balance of power across 3 sectors of space, and it all started with a desperate plea for 5 ships from a dying civilization. 3 days after Ambassador Veltar's meeting with Captain Martinez, the long-range sensor arrays at Zephyrian Defense Station 7 began detecting something impossible. Sensor operator Quinnell stared at her displays with growing confusion, running diagnostics on her equipment for the 4th time in 10 minutes. Commander Scythiara, I'm receiving anomalous readings at grid reference 77 Alpha, Quinnell reported, her crystalline form flickering with uncertainty. The energy signatures don't match anything in our databases. Fleet Commander Scythara abandoned her position at the tactical planning table and moved to the sensor station. Her compound eyes focused on the streams of data flowing across multiple screens. After 3,000 years of space travel, the Zephyrians had encountered every type of ship drive and energy signature in known space. These readings were completely foreign. Show me the source coordinates, Cythera commanded. The main display screen filled with a star map showing the edge of Zephyrian territory. A cluster of energy contacts was moving toward their space from the direction of human-controlled systems. The signatures were massive, far larger than anything the humans had shown during previous diplomatic encounters. How many contacts are we tracking? Cythara asked. Quinnell's form dimmed as she rechecked her instruments. Initial count shows 47 distinct signatures, Commander, but more are appearing every few minutes. 47 ships. The humans had exceeded their requested 5 vessels by nearly 10 times. Cythara felt a moment of relief mixed with concern. Perhaps the young species had misunderstood the scale of assistance needed, but more help was certainly welcome. Continue monitoring and update me every 15 minutes, she ordered, returning to her planning session with the surviving Zephyrian fleet captains. 15 minutes later, Quinnell's voice carried across the command center with barely controlled panic. Commander, we now show 112 contacts. The energy signatures are getting stronger as they approach. Cythara dropped the holographic battle plans she had been reviewing and rushed back to the sensor station. The display now showed over 100 distinct energy signatures moving in perfect formation toward Zephyrian space. Each signature was larger than their biggest battleships. This can't be correct, Cythara muttered. Run a full diagnostic on all sensor arrays. I've run diagnostics 6 times, Commander, Quinnell replied. All systems are functioning normally. The contacts are real. 20 minutes later, the count had risen to 230 vessels. 40 minutes after that, it reached 400. The sensor operators worked frantically to track the growing armada as more and more ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of human territory. Ambassador Veltar received the emergency communication while reviewing supply requests for the remaining Zephyrian colonies. He materialized in the defense station's command center via emergency hologram, his crystalline form showing the strain of constant crisis management. Commander Cythara, what is the nature of this emergency? Veltar asked. The humans appear to have misunderstood our request, Cythara replied, gesturing toward the tactical display. We asked for 5 ships. They're sending hundreds. Veltar studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Zephyrian records. Some of the contacts were so massive they registered as small moons, rather. Then spacecraft. Others moved in patterns that defied conventional physics. How many ships are we tracking now? Veltar inquired. 643 confirmed contacts with more arriving constantly, Quinnell reported from her station. Sir, some of these vessels are larger than our space stations. The communication array suddenly crackled to life with an incoming transmission. The voice that emerged was calm, professional, and distinctly human. Zephyrian Defense Command. This is Admiral Kate Sullivan aboard UNS Leviathan. Human Expeditionary Force has arrived as requested. We are transmitting fleet composition and tactical coordination protocols for your review. Data began flooding into the Zephyrian computer systems faster than their crystalline processors could handle. Ship specifications, weapon loadouts, tactical, doctrines, and command structures filled their databases with information that challenged everything they thought they knew about human military capability. Veltar's form flickered as he absorbed the incoming data. The lead vessel, UNS Leviathan, was classified as a dreadnought with enough firepower to level a planet. Behind it came battleships, carriers, destroyers, cruisers, and ship types that had no equivalent in Zephyrian military doctrine. Admiral Sullivan, Veltar managed to respond, we appreciate your prompt response to our request. However, there appears to have been a miscommunication regarding the scale of assistance needed. I'm afraid I don't understand, Ambassador. Sullivan's voice replied over the communication link. You requested military assistance against an adaptive enemy force threatening your territory. We've responded with standard deployment protocols for this type of threat. Standard deployment protocols. Veltar felt his crystalline matrix dim with the realization that humans considered nearly 1,000 warships a standard response to military threats. What did they consider an excessive response? Admiral, we specifically requested 5 vessels for surgical precision operations, Veltar explained carefully. A brief pause followed before Sullivan responded. Ambassador, with respect, 5 ships wouldn't qualify as a reconnaissance mission in human military doctrine. When facing an adaptive enemy that's consumed 17 worlds, surgical precision requires overwhelming force applied with extreme efficiency. Commander Cythara activated her own communication link. Admiral Sullivan, this is Fleet Commander Cythara. Our remaining forces consist of 43 vessels. Your fleet appears to outnumber our entire military by a factor of 20. Confirmed, Commander, Sullivan replied. Our current deployment includes 862 combat vessels, plus support ships, medical vessels, supply craft, and mobile repair facilities. We've also brought experimental weapons systems for field testing against Korthak adaptive capabilities. Experimental weapons systems. Veltar exchanged glances with Cythara as more data flowed through their systems. The humans had brought weapons that had never been used in combat, treating the war against the Korthak as an opportunity to test their latest military technology. Admiral, while we deeply appreciate this show of support, we're concerned about the logistics of coordinating such a large force, Cythara said diplomatically. No coordination necessary, Commander, Sullivan responded. Human forces will operate independently using our own tactical doctrines. We recommend your remaining ships maintain safe distance while we engage the enemy. Safe distance. The humans were politely telling the Zephyrian military to stay out of their way while they handled the entire war themselves. Veltar realized, with growing horror, that his simple request for 5 ships had triggered a military response that would reshape the entire galactic balance of power. The sensor arrays continued tracking new arrivals as the human fleet settled into formation at the edge of Zephyrian space. Each ship bristled with weapon systems that exceeded Zephyrian understanding of physics and engineering. The smallest human destroyer carried more firepower than their largest battleship. "What have we done?" Veltar whispered to himself as he watched humanity's war machine prepare to demonstrate why humans had a reputation for excessive responses throughout the galaxy. The Korthak Empire had consumed 43 civilizations across the galaxy over the past 1,000 years, and their adaptive artificial intelligence systems had learned to counter every known form of warfare. Their biomechanical ships could evolve defenses against any weapon within minutes of first contact, turning each battle into a futile exercise for their enemies. Nothing had prepared them for humans. The first contact occurred at the edge of the Kepler system, where a Korthak scouting force of 12 vessels encountered Captain Ryan Clark's heavy destroyer, UNS Thunder Bay, leading a patrol group of 6 human ships. The Korthak immediately began their standard tactical assessment, analyzing the human vessels for weaknesses and weapon signatures. "Korthak ships are conducting active scans," reported Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker from the tactical station. "They appear to be cataloging our weapon systems." Captain Clark studied the alien vessels through the main viewer. They looked like massive metal spiders with pulsing organic components grafted onto their hulls. Sensor readings showed the biomechanical nature of their construction, with living tissue integrated into their armor and weapon systems. "Let them look all they want," Clark said with a grin. "Parker, target the lead ship with plasma batteries and fire when ready." The Thunder Bay's main guns erupted in brilliant streams of superheated plasma that struck the Korthak vessel directly amidships. The alien ship's hull began adapting immediately, developing heat-resistant plating and energy-dispersing fields to counter the plasma bombardment. "Target is adapting to our plasma weapons," Parker reported. "Armor effectiveness increasing rapidly." "As expected," Clark replied. "Switch to kinetic bombardment. Load solid tungsten projectiles and fire at maximum velocity." The Thunder Bay's secondary weapon systems launched a barrage of dense metal slugs at nearly 10% of light speed. The Korthak ship, still adapting its defenses against plasma weapons, took the full impact of the kinetic strike. Its hull cracked and atmosphere vented into space as the alien vessel struggled to understand this completely different form of attack. "Direct hit on Target 1, Parker announced. "Enemy vessel is venting atmosphere and showing structural damage." The other Korthak ships began adapting to the kinetic weapons, developing thicker armor and impact-dispersing hull designs. But before they could complete their adaptations, the human patrol group switched tactics again. Captain Amy Rodriguez's experimental vessel, UNS Wildfire, engaged its prototype quantum phase drive, disappearing from normal space-time and reappearing directly inside the formation of enemy ships. The Wildfire materialized between 2 Korthak vessels and immediately fired quantum disruptor torpedoes at point-blank range. The alien ships had no time to adapt, as the quantum weapons tore apart their molecular structure at the subatomic level. 2 enemy vessels simply ceased to exist, leaving only expanding clouds of elementary particles. "This is Wildfire," Rodriguez reported over the communication link. "Quantum disruptors are extremely effective against biomechanical targets. The organic components cannot adapt to molecular dissolution." Captain Clark watched the remaining Korthak ships trying desperately to analyze and counter the quantum weapons. Their adaptive systems had never encountered anything that attacked matter at the fundamental level. While they struggled to understand the new threat, Clark ordered another tactical change. "All ships switch to gravity manipulation weapons. Let's see them adapt to having their mass redistributed." The UNS Titan's hammer, commanded by Captain Doug Matthews, engaged its experimental gravity cannon. The weapon created a localized gravitational field around 3 Korthak ships, compressing them into dense metal spheres in less than 10 seconds. The alien vessels didn't have time to adapt before the crushing force of artificial gravity turned them into compressed scrap metal. Across the battlefront, similar scenes played out as human tactical doctrine proved devastatingly effective against adaptive enemies. The humans didn't rely on single weapon systems that could be countered. Instead, they used overwhelming variety, switching between plasma, kinetic, quantum, gravitational, and exotic weapons faster than the Korthak systems could adapt. Captain Linda Foster commanded the stealth frigate UNS Shadow Strike, using her ship's cloaking device not for reconnaissance, but for ramming attacks. The Shadow Strike would decloak at the last possible moment and strike Korthak vessels at near-light speed before vanishing again. The aliens had no defense against a tactic so fundamentally insane that no civilized military would consider it. Shadow Strike reporting successful ram on target designation 7, Foster announced cheerfully over the combat network. Hull integrity at 60%, but the enemy ship no longer exists. Admiral Sullivan monitored the battle from the bridge of UNS Leviathan, watching as human forces systematically dismantled the Korthak fleet using tactics that violated every principle of conventional warfare. The carrier UNS Enterprise launched swarms of fighter craft that attacked like angry insects, overwhelming enemy point defenses through sheer numbers and unpredictable flight patterns. "Ma'am, the Korthak ships are attempting to retreat," reported Commander Nicole Hayes from her position at the tactical display. "Their adaptive systems appear to be overloaded by the variety of our weapons." Negative on allowing retreat, Sullivan replied, "All ships pursue and destroy. We can't let them report our capabilities back to their main force." Captain Tony Garcia's UNS Resilience demonstrated the human approach to pursuit by ramming directly through a fleeing Korthak vessel while firing antimatter torpedoes from point-blank range. The resulting explosion lit up the star system like a miniature sun, completely vaporizing both ships. Garcia and his crew transported to safety milliseconds before impact, leaving behind another example of human tactical insanity. The Experimental Weapons Division had turned the battle into a massive field test for humanity's most advanced military technology. Weapons that had never seen combat were deployed with devastating effect against an enemy that had no reference point for human engineering principles. "This is interesting," observed Captain Mark Johnson from the research vessel UNS Discovery. "Our new temporal displacement bombs are causing the Korthak ships to experience time dilation effects. They're trying to adapt to weapons that hit them in the past." Meanwhile, Zephyrian forces watched the battle from what Admiral Sullivan had politely described as a safe distance. Commander Sithara stared at her tactical displays in fascination and horror as human ships employed weapons and tactics that seemed designed by someone who had never heard of military doctrine. "They're not just fighting," Sithara observed to her staff. "They're experimenting. They're using this battle to test weapons we didn't know existed. The battle that should have lasted hours was over in 90 minutes. The entire Korthak scouting force had been eliminated with 0 human casualties and minimal damage to the human fleet. Captain Garcia's voluntary ramming attack was the closest thing to a loss, and even that had been calculated and planned. All enemy contacts eliminated, Hayes reported to Admiral Sullivan. Total human casualties, 0. Total enemy survivors, 0. We're ready to proceed to the main Korthak fleet positions. Sullivan smiled coldly as she reviewed the battle reports. The Korthak had built their empire on the assumption that adaptive technology could counter any threat. They had never encountered humans, who considered adaptation a challenge rather than a solution, and responded to adaptive enemies by using more weapons than any adaptive system could process simultaneously. The real war was about to begin. 6 hours after the first shots were fired, the war was over. The mighty Korthak Empire that had terrorized 3 sectors of space for 1,000 years lay in ruins across 7 star systems. Their adaptive fleets, designed to counter any weapon through evolutionary learning, had been overwhelmed by an enemy that used more types of weapons than their artificial intelligence could process. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood on the bridge of UNS Leviathan, reviewing the final battle reports with satisfaction. The casualty numbers told the story of complete human victory in terms that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Final casualty report, Commander Hayes. Sullivan requested. 43 personnel injured across the entire fleet, Admiral, Commander Nicole Hayes replied from her position at the tactical station. No fatalities. The medical ship UNS Mercy barely had any patients to treat. The human fleet had engaged and destroyed over 2,000 Korthak vessels without losing a single ship. Captain Tony Garcia's UNS Resilience showed scorch marks and hull damage from its ramming attack, but the crew wore those scars like badges of honor. The ship's motto had been changed to "We Break for Nobody" in celebration of their successful kamikaze run. Ambassador Veltar materialized via hologram on the bridge, his crystalline form noticeably dimmer than it had been during their first meeting. The strain of watching his people's salvation delivered through overwhelming human violence had left him emotionally exhausted. Admiral Sullivan, on behalf of the Zephyrian Confederation, we express our deepest gratitude, Veltar said with formal courtesy. Your 5 ships performed admirably beyond all expectations. Admiral Sullivan raised an eyebrow and glanced at Commander Hayes, who was suppressing a smile. Ambassador, we brought 862 combat vessels to this engagement. Veltar's harmonics carried embarrassment as he processed this information. Yes, well, we had hoped you might show some degree of restraint in your response. Captain Lisa Martinez, observing the conversation from her diplomatic vessel UNS Horizon, couldn't contain her amusement. Ambassador, you asked humans for military help. Did you expect us to hold back? The question hung in the air like an accusation. The Zephyrians had spent decades considering humans too young and aggressive for serious diplomatic relations, yet they had turned to those same humans when their elegant civilization faced extinction. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Perhaps we underestimated the scope of human military doctrine, Veltar admitted with as much dignity as he could manage. Admiral Sullivan activated the strategic display, showing the aftermath of the battle across multiple star systems. Debris fields marked the locations where Korthak fleets had met human weapons. Several planets showed impact craters where gravity weapons had been tested against surface installations. The Korthak Empire has been completely eliminated, Sullivan reported. Their homeworlds have been secured, their fleet destroyed, and their adaptive technology captured for study. The threat to galactic peace has been neutralized. Within days of the battle, the political landscape of the galaxy began shifting in ways that no one had anticipated. The demonstration of human military capability sent shockwaves through every government and military organization in known space. 17 different species submitted formal requests for human military assistance within the first week. Admiral Ben Carter, reviewing intelligence reports from his headquarters on Mars, noted the changing diplomatic situation with amusement. The Altarian Republic wants us to help with their pirate problem. They're specifically requesting that we show restraint and only send 200 ships. Admiral Paul Chen from the Outer Colonies fleet shook his head in disbelief. 200 ships for pirates? What do they think restraint means? More interesting is the Centauri Alliance request, Carter continued. They want help with their border disputes and specifically asked us to bring everything we have. Apparently, they learned from the Zephyrian example. The Galactic Council, which had previously dismissed human civilization as too young for serious consideration, extended an emergency invitation for Earth to join as a permanent security member. The motion passed unanimously, with several member species arguing that human military protection was essential for galactic stability. General Sam Rodriguez reviewed the requests from his position at Luna Military Academy. We have 47, separate requests for military assistance, ranging from border patrols to full-scale invasions. Everyone wants human protection now. The new reality required adjustments to human military doctrine. The Space Command established the Galactic Peacekeeping Division to handle the flood of requests for assistance. Standard deployment packages were created, with the smallest intervention force consisting of 50 ships and the largest approaching 2,000 vessels. Ambassador Carol Wright took her position as Earth's senior galactic representative 6 months after the Korthak War. The human embassy on Neutral Station 1 was built larger than any other diplomatic facility, a not-so-subtle reminder of humanity's new position in galactic affairs. Veltar stood before the embassy's impressive entrance, preparing for another diplomatic meeting that would have been unthinkable just a year earlier. The Zephyrian Confederation wanted to formalize their defense treaty with Earth, accepting human protection in exchange for technological cooperation and trade agreements. The Zephyrian Confederation wishes to establish a permanent defense pact with Earth, Veltar announced to Ambassador Wright and her diplomatic staff. We recognize that human military doctrine provides security that our traditional methods cannot match. Wright smiled warmly, reviewing the proposed treaty terms on her tablet. We'd be happy to discuss formal arrangements, though I should mention that our standard defense package includes a minimum fleet deployment of 500 vessels. Veltar's form flickered with what humans had learned to recognize as Zephyrian laughter. Of course it does. We should have expected nothing less from humans. The galaxy had learned a fundamental lesson about human nature. When humans offered help, they didn't provide the minimum assistance necessary to solve the problem. They brought everything they could deploy, delivered with overwhelming enthusiasm and terrifying efficiency. Other species began adopting human military terminology and tactics. The concept of overkill entered galactic military doctrine as a strategic principle, rather than a warning. Military academies across known space began studying human battle footage as examples of how to approach warfare with proper seriousness. The human fleet remained on permanent patrol throughout the sectors previously threatened by the Korthak Empire. Their presence served as a gentle reminder to potential aggressors that Earth's neighbors were under the protection of a species that considered massive retaliation a starting point rather than an escalation. Veltar departed the human embassy with a signed defense treaty and a newfound respect for human diplomatic methods. The young species that his government had dismissed as barbarians had become the dominant military power in the galaxy through their simple philosophy of helping their friends with everything they had. As he returned to his ship, Veltar reflected on the lesson his people had learned. When you ask humans for help, you don't get what you expect or what you think you need. You get everything they can give, delivered faster than you thought possible, with results that exceed your wildest hopes and fears. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly what it had needed all along.